Okay, so we're going to finish class 32.
Thank you.
There, shh, 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 shh. We're going to finish 32. There is no class 33. We're just skipping that one. Next Tuesday, we have art history test. Classes 27 through 32. Basically from the beginning of the semester. If you are not here, you can do it the next day when you get back.
Coffee smells so good.
It does smell good.
But it's just black coffee.
Okay.
Put creamer in your coffee?
No, but this one I think is like cinnamon roll flavored or something.
I think it's so satisfying people drink coffee black.
It's satisfying, but you know they're like pulling back yours.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to finish class 32 with this video. This is a video of Durham Cathedral. So this is like the best example of pure Romanesque architecture. I mentioned this at the end of last Thursday when we were talking. This is what we consider Norman Romanesque. So they'll explain here in a moment.
We're in Durham Cathedral at the top of a hill in northeastern England. This is one of the great early cathedrals.
And it's built less than 3 decades after the Norman conquest. That is, after William the Conqueror crossed the Channel with his army and invaded and took over England in a rather brutal invasion and replaced the old order of Anglo-Saxon England for this new Norman order and built many churches, among the first of which is Durham Cathedral.
This
You're going to want to
location
take notes
is
on
at
this.
a bend in a river
I'm also going to put
that is
this video
naturally
in
fortified by a
along
steep
with the
slope.
video of
And
the
the
recording.
cathedral is built, as is the castle, next to it at this high point. And it was built to contain the relics of an extremely important English saint, Saint Cuthbert.
Cuthbert lived for a time on an island just off the east coast of England in an area that was then called Northumbria. That island is called Lindisfarne, and you may have heard of it because one of the most beautiful of all early medieval illuminated manuscripts, the Lindisfarne Gospels, was produced at the monastery at Lindisfarne.
And was made to honor Saint Cuthbert, and was transported with the remains of the saint from the island to this more protected area at a time when Vikings were threatening the coast.
It might seem odd to be carrying around the body of a saint, but the relics of St. Cuthbert were incredibly important. They performed miracles, and in fact, a shrine was built for St. Cuthbert. It was gilded, it was covered in jewels.
Cuthbert developed a following that extended across the nation and even in the continent. England had been taken by the Normans and was politically associated with that northern part of what we now call France.
Normandy, and that's where the Duke of Normandy, who invaded England in 1066, came from.
And he brought with him not only his own bishops, not only his own nobility, but also building techniques from the continent. And so there is a continuity between Norman churches such as this one and the Norman churches that we see in northern France, which is why we call this style Anglo-Norman. English history is complicated. We have native peoples here that were conquered by the Romans, who then left in the early 5th century. The political vacuum was then filled by invaders from what is now southern Denmark and northern Germany, peoples that we call the Angles and the Saxons, or the Anglo-Saxons.
And then Anglo-Saxon England is supplanted by Norman England, and this is one of the first Anglo-Norman churches. And we feel the ancientness of this building. It is heavy, it feels fortified, and in that way we know that we're standing in a Romanesque church.
This was some of the earliest large-scale architecture to take place since the Romans had left, and we call it Romanesque because this architecture was dependent on the technology that the Romans had originally used. That is, the round arch.
One of the things that one notices immediately is how decorative the surfaces are. That is a key feature of Anglo-Norman Romanesque that differentiates it from what was going on the French continent.
You don't
We're
see
standing
those
in the
types of
nave,
carvings
and we're
in
surrounded
mainland.
by
That's
these massive piers
mostly
that
England.
hold up the heavy vaulting above us. And there are basically two types of piers that alternate. One is a simple cylindrical pier, and the other is a more complex and larger compound pier that has attached columns.
And those cylindrical piers are the ones that carry this amazing linear decoration. When we walk in from the west end, we see fluted columns. As we make our way east toward the holiest end of the church, we see cylindrical piers decorated with chevrons, these zigzag shapes. And then we come upon lozenge shapes, and in each case really deeply cut, creating dark shadows that were likely originally painted.
And if you look closely, you'll notice that ingeniously the stonemasons created a kind of mass production. Each stone is identical to another, and yet when they fit together, they create these continuous patterns.
And this is a testament to the increasing skill of stonemasons during the Romanesque period.
As we move eastward, we see massive spiral columns, which reflect the spiral columns at St. Peter's in Rome, surrounding the tomb of St. Peter. Here, the columns are closer to the tomb of St. Cuthbert, creating a correspondence between Cuthbert and Peter.
Also, the dimensions of this church are very close to the dimensions of Old St. Peter's, and that was a very common thing in medieval architecture, to emulate important precedents like St. Peter's or important churches in Jerusalem.
The interior elevation is three-part. Above the nave arcade is this broad, heavy gallery.
I'm struck by the depth of the archway and the rolls of molding that lead our eye up to that gallery. And we can see that in some cases that molding is decorated with that chevron zigzag pattern in these wonderfully complex ways.
And we see that chevron zigzag everywhere in this church. It creates the most lively pattern that activates the surfaces of stone.
Now, the church is relatively dark, as most Romanesque churches are. We can see a clear story, which is rather small, and interestingly, those windows are slightly inset. So again, we have a sense of the depth of the wall.
And there is, in fact, a narrow walkway that moves just in front of those windows.
So this idea of emphasizing the depth of the wall, this interest in decorative carving, these are all things that art historians see as carrying through after the Romanesque into the English Gothic.
And one of my favorite decorative aspects of the church can be seen in the aisles. We see these doubled attached columns with these interlacing arches just above. It's almost musical.
We have to imagine these painted in reds and greens and yellows, so they would have really stood out. Art historians believe that these might be influenced by the art of Islamic Spain.
For example, in the Great Mosque at Cordoba.
Okay, that's the main part that I wanted to get through. So you see here and we're going to be able to see as we move forward into more of the Gothic periods, this big difference between what we'll see later with these really light, thinner walls, thinner construction, right? Things are not as dense. Here in the Romanesque, everything is very, very dense. Those walls are 4 or 5 feet thick, something like that. And again, it's very dark, right? The more holes you cut in the walls, the less stable it is. So that's why they had what's called the clear story, right? So the story, the area that's clear, that lets light in. And you can do a lot of windows up in the clear story because, well, you have less weight bearing up there, right? So you can really punch some holes in there, but even still, it's not going to let in a lot of weight or a lot of light. So Romanesque churches are going to be very, very dark. Obviously, there's lighting in there now, but there wouldn't have been before. It was just candles. So in an early morning mass or midnight mass or something like that, or doing the divine office in the evening or in the morning, you're going to have, it's going to be dark. It's going to be very, very dark. But those are the characteristics of a Romanesque church, of an early medieval church. Those rounded column or those rounded archways, you're going to see that throughout. Heavy columns, right? Because all of the weight of the church is going to be supported on those heavy columns. They're not really going to be able to kind of figure out until a little bit later how to make those columns thinner and lighter. And the same thing with the walls, right? We see every doorway has that really thick wall. So what do? They decorate the archway to make it not look like you're just going through a tunnel. Otherwise, that's what it's going to look like. So they're doing those chevrons, those zigzags, they're doing all those kind of patterns to try to make it a little bit lighter. He talks about activating the space, right? And you hear that a lot in architecture. They're activating the space, or they're activating the surface. All that means is you're doing some sort of a design to make the surface of an archway or of a wall or of a ceiling more interesting. So when you hear that, that's basically what you mean. What's that?
Like carved into the stone, like after it's already melted?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, they would.
so that's really high.
Yeah. Yep. Now sometimes they would be carving it as they're acquiring it or as they're doing the construction. Yeah. So I'm gonna have a link. I'll have a link for that on your. I'll have a link for you on your handout to a link to that video. That's Khan Academy. I don't think we've done a video from Khan Academy before this semester. I know seniors, you've heard their voices before. Evan said they sound like golf announcers, and the reason is because they're trying to be quiet because they're actually there in Durham Cathedral, and you hear the people talking behind them. So when they're doing these recordings, these videos, they're usually in the spaces, and so they're trying to be respectful and be quiet. So that's why they kind of sound very. He's on the 17th hole.
Why is golf like that? Because they're
Same thing, so that they're not very loud with the.
loud and it's like,
Yeah. Golf clap. Welcome to the Phoenix Open.
Waste
Hello. Waste Management Phoenix Open. Hello. Okay, so let's move to class 34. We're going to be looking at castles, but we're also going to be looking at civic planning. We're going to be looking at how medieval towns were built, and why are they in the shape that they're in. But before we look at the way that towns are, first we have to look at what castles are. I don't have this out yet. Okay, so why were castles built? Pretty obviously, castles are built for protection, right? It's a fort. We don't really know why or where the term castle comes from, but basically it is the private fortified residence of a lord or a noble. Okay, this is distinct from a palace. A palace is generally not fortified, and this is not also. It's not necessarily a fort either. A fort is going to be purely military. It's going to be purely for protecting things. A castle is basically a combination of a palace and a fort. So, right. So people are living in there. This is generally the home of a lord, of a noble. This is where his knights are going to be. This is where his army is going to be. This is where all of his protection is going to be. This is kind of the center of his little empire, right, so to speak, or his area. And so it needs to be fortified because, well, that's a place, if you go and take over that place, now you are the lord of that place. So it has to be fortified, but it also has to be livable. We don't really see a lot of castles until the 9th or 10th centuries. This is after the fall of the Carolingian Empire. There's all this massive territory that was once ruled by Charlemagne, which is now being divided up by all these different lords and princes and all that sort of thing. And so when you have all these little pockets of territory and not one big central ruler, you have to, the lord of that area has to make sure that his area is secure and safe. And so he does that by building a castle. They are going to be basically controlling the area immediately surrounding them, right?
yes, but it has the
How do you build it? Just a lot of work. A lot of work. A lot of serfs, not necessarily slaves.
The forest, like as close as you can get to the forest.
It's like on a mountain
in
at
the
the same
forest.
time.
It's also on a mountain. So you always are going to want to build a generally speaking, you're going to want to build a castle on a tall place. Why? Easier to defend. You can see the enemy coming. It's also harder, right? If you've ever done any sort of like capture the flag or paintball or anything like that, you want to have an elevated position, right? You can see who's coming, but also it's more difficult to attack from down low. We always think of castles as being these military structures, right? That's what we see in movies. Oh, let's go attack the castle. Let's defend the castle. But the majority of the time, 98% of the time, I don't know, I just threw that number out there, but vast majority of the time, this is a place of peace. Yes, it has to be defensible. Yes, it has thick walls. Yes, it has all of those sorts of defensive capabilities, but this is a place where people are living. And it's not just the Lord's family, but it's also other people. And it depends on castle to castle. How many people are going to be within the castle complex? It just depends, right?
When were cannons invented?
Ooh. Don't know. Chinese did it first.
But it was like after this, right? 'Cause
It was right around this area, I think. Right around this time.
So where is this located?
This one is Segovia, Spain.
isn't that in? That's
Okay.
what it looks like today.
Yeah, that's what it looks like today. So we have urban castles used to control the local populace and important travel routes. Then we have rural castles situated near features that were integral to life in the community, such as mills, fertile land, or a water source, right? Were there monasteries? Were there places of worship inside the castle walls? Sometimes, but generally not. This is usually more of a political place. Sometimes a monastery is going to have some aspects of its life inside of a castle wall, but not necessarily. Okay. East Sussex, England, surrounded by a moat.
That's a big moat.
It's a big moat. We have one of the more famous castles in the world. This is Windsor Castle. This is the home of the monarch. So Buckingham Palace, that's a palace, right? That's where the king, formerly the queen, would live. But Windsor Castle is their castle. This is actually their home, right? They spend a lot of their time in Buckingham Palace because it's close to London, it's close to, right, all that stuff. But this is theirs. This is their castle, and it's defensible.
They're small somehow.
Yeah.
Why did they, that grass? Oh, my hair was it?
It wasn't here. No. I'm not sure.
How's it defensible?
Wait, what's the difference between a castle and a palace?
So a palace is less defensible. It still does have some defenses to it, but it's usually within a city. It's usually within city walls, which we'll look at, but it doesn't have all those defensive characteristics. A castle is almost like a self-contained little city. So you'll be able to see the difference here in a second.
This isn't like on a hill.
No, this one isn't, but it's big enough, and there were, this gate used to have actually a wall right in front of it, so it was much more defensible.
Where's that again?
This is Windsor. This is just outside of London.
So that's not used for defense or anything.
No. Mm-mm. This is in Bulgaria. Again, this is a smaller castle, much smaller. So they're going to be in all different shapes and sizes, all different characteristics, but they're going to have some characteristics that are going to be similar. All right. So what are the characteristics? First, we have what's called a moat. So this is under features, a moat. This was the original spelling, M-O-T-T-E. It's an earthen mound with a flat top. So again, like I said, generally you want to build a castle on an elevated position. Easy to defend, easy to see the enemy coming. If you didn't have an elevated position, what did you do? You built one. And so this is an example of a man-made moat, basically a man-made hill. Now you might be saying, Mr. Latham, I thought the moat was the water around it. Well, how do you build a tall earthen mound? You dig out. So they would dig out, put earth, dig out, put earth. And how do you do that? You do it around it. And then, water fills in.
That's confusing.
So we call that water around it a moat.
That is really.
It's actually the hill,
It's
right?
actually the will.
Hill.
Hill.
It's actually that hill. So this is
The will.
the moat, right? So it's an earthen mound. Often artificial, although sometimes it incorporated a pre-existing feature of the landscape. The excavation of the earth to make the mound left a ditch around the moat called the moat. So here's your cross section. You've got the land, right? And you want to build a hill. So you build a hill. This is your moat. How do you build this? You excavate out from around it. Mr. Ridd's going to throw this pen away,
Just hide it.
right? This is the moat. Come on, guys, come up with different terms. They didn't. So now we're stuck with it.
Wait, say again?
They're spelled differently, but they're the same thing.
Spelled differently, same thing.
Wow.
So they were just digging out this area around it, all the way around it, to build this. That's called the moat. That's called the moat. In Old English, it was probably called the mata or something, or the moti or whatever. They probably had a different pronunciation.
But what,
Okay.
What did they fill that whole thing in?
Oftentimes not water. Sometimes it was just a ditch. Why? Again, it's now your enemy has to go down there. Now they're stuck in there. Now you can pew, pew, pew. Right? Or pour stuff on them or throw stuff on them. Huh? Grenade, not grenades. Ducks? Rabbits? No. That was just Monty Python.
I knew you were going to reference them.
Okay. So that's your moat. The keep.
Whoa.
So the keep is the great tower, usually the most strongly defended point of a castle. So this is the building, right? This is the main building of a castle, is called the keep. Although often the strongest part of a castle and last place of refuge if the outer defenses fell, the keep was not left empty in case of attack, but it was used as a residence by the lord who owned the castle, or his guests or representatives. So this is where the lord lives, right? This is where the lord and his family lives, sometimes other people as well. This is called the keep.
So it's a lot of stairs.
It's a lot of
Wait,
stairs.
what do you mean is the last place of refuge?
It is the most strongly defended. So as we're going to see as we move forward, you're going to see where we have concentric circles of defense, right? So you have to get through this area, then this area, then this area, and then finally you get to the keep. Okay?
Wouldn't that be the easiest because the enemy can hit it?
They don't have long-range artillery yet at this point.
Oh, okay.
So it's all hand-to-hand combat or arrows, right? So they're, by the time when this stuff is being built, you're not going to have cannonballs. I don't know exactly when, but you're not going to have them yet, right? I think it was like 1400s, 1300s. Okay. They would have those, but again, the first catapult, Leonardo da Vinci, right? That was the 1400s, so or early 1500s. So again,
More than trebuchet.
same thing. That's not really going to be used as much. That's much more of a mid second millennium thing. Okay, so like 1400s, 1500s. Okay, so you don't have that long range artillery. The bailey, also called the ward, was the fortified enclosure. So this is the bailey. Okay, these are your walls. These are outer walls, or the main walls of the castle. And then inside you have the courtyard, and then inside you have other stuff, and then inside that you have the keep. So the keep on top of the moat was the domicile of the lord in charge of the castle, bastion of last defense, while the bailey, so all this area inside here, there would be little rooms, sometimes extra buildings, depending on the size of the castle complex, right? You'd have stables, you'd have an armory, you'd have a blacksmith shop, you'd have all this kind of stuff inside this courtyard, inside the bailey. Some of them were very big, as we're going to see. I don't know specifically.
How do they make those black things? To like cover up.
The roof?
Yeah.
I think that's slate, but I'm not sure what it would be now. Here's another example of a bailey, right? So you can see here, this is the moat down here, and then the moat down there, right? So they dug out here, they built this up, now they built the bailey, and then you can barely see the keep inside of here, right? That's the keep. But inside all the rest of the area, again, stables, extra houses, other places where people can live, work, right? Things like that. So you can see here how it's very defensible. You have one way in, one way out. There's no other way to get in, right? Unless you have high-powered cannons, which they didn't have yet, there's no way you're getting in there, okay? Over time, the focus of high-status accommodation shifted from the keep to the bailey. Basically, we have, right, these additions of other buildings that are even more fortified than the keep later on. All right, the next ring of, and not every castle is going to have all of these features, right? But this is kind of your basic structure. The next function is what's called a curtain wall. Well, people are getting in the bailey, or they are able to tunnel in, or whatever. Okay, so what do? Build another wall. This is called the curtain wall. Usually it's thinner, usually it's a little bit lower. It's just one more ring of protection.
Which one is that under?
So the curtain wall is this outer one here. Okay, and then this is the bailey, and then it's destroyed now, but the keep would be inside here. Okay. So the curtain wall.
So you built a wall, and then the keep wall.
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
So it had to be high enough to make scaling the walls with ladder difficult, and thick enough to withstand bombardment from siege engines. Typical wall could be 10 feet thick and 40 feet tall, although sizes varied greatly between castles, right? So 40 feet tall, that's about as tall as this building, 10 feet wide. I don't know, it's about half this classroom, right? So pretty thick. You're not going to be able to get through that very easily. To protect them from undermining, so tunneling underneath, oftentimes a curtain wall would have a stone skirt around it. So here's your curtain wall, right? You're going to dig it into the earth. Well, people are just going to go bloop and go underneath it. So what do? Before you build it, you build basically kind of a diagonal wall leading up to it.
Smarties.
So now you have to dig all the way under here, and there's another one under here. So now you have to dig all the way under here from 40, 50 feet away. That's a lot of tunneling. It's going to cave in, right? So a simple addition of just one more wall, basically a horizontal wall or a diagonal wall, that's going to solve most of your problems. Okay. Again, not every castle is going to have this. Same thing, if you already have a water-filled moat down here, no one's going to be able to tunnel in. Why? Your tunnel's going to fill with water. Okay, so there's another defense there. So it's going to be very, very difficult to attack. Curtain walls obviously are going to be studded with towers throughout, as we've been seeing. It's pretty obvious why there's towers. We're not going to see a lot of arrow slits in walls. So we see some arrow slits here. That's not going to really become common until about the 13th century.
Where?
These little skinny windows. Those are thin enough to let your archers on the inside fire out, but small enough that your archers or the outside archers can't fire in. Oftentimes also on the walls. So this is we're looking top down from the wall. So this is your wall. So bad guys are out here, good guys are in here, right? So here's your wall. Oftentimes you would make your arrow slits really tiny, but wider on the inside. Why? So your archers can angle and shoot this way and shoot that way, but it's really difficult for outside guys to fire in, right? So it's a very defensible position. These are a little bit more wide. They're going to develop that a little bit later. Okay. Then we have the gatehouse, right? We've all seen this. We've all seen this in movies and TVs. Was there that big iron gate? Yeah, oftentimes. Or sometimes it was just a really big, thick wall reinforced with iron. Sometimes it was iron doors. Sometimes it was a gate. Sometimes, right? It just depends. Why do you have a gate? You control everything going in and out of the castle, right? Most of the time, the gate was open. It was wide open, just like this. And yes, you'd have guards. Yes, you'd have guards up on the tower all the time, just to make sure that there's not going to be a sneak attack. And then the gates were closed. Every night, the gates were closed. If you're outside, good luck, you're out. You can't come back in. And then you wait until the next morning, okay? So you've got to make sure that you're back by sundown or whatever the rules of the castle were.
Weren't there guards out there and open it?
What's that?
Weren't there guards out there to open it for you?
They wouldn't do that very often, especially because it's dark, there's no street lamps, you don't know who it is. Yeah. But again, it depends on the basic rules. Okay, so here's just some more examples. We have a gatehouse and a bailey surrounded by a moat. There's no curtain wall here.
What kind of castle is that? That looks super small.
It is a much smaller one, right? So these are going to be in all different shapes and sizes, but then we have this one, which is pretty large. This is the Croc de Chevalier, which is basically in southern Spain, but it was manned by French troops, and it was the headquarters of basically the French commander as he's sending his troops off to the Crusades. Again, one area here. It's not filled with water because we're in southern Spain, desert climate, but it's also built on top of a already existing mountain.
Is there really any way you'd be able to climb up that?
What's that?
Is there really any way you'd be able to climb up that? That looks like super steep.
Yeah, not really.
So how do you get up there?
There'd be roads over here, and then this is your way to get in. And that's it. Okay, yeah.
How would that, building a moat, how would it fill with rainwater?
It was pretty rainy, and so, especially in a lot of the places that we're looking at, so it's going to eventually fill in. But that wasn't really the main purpose. We always see moats with water. It was really just meant to be a ditch. Okay, so let's look at medieval civic plannings. Medieval civic planning is going to be based entirely around a castle, especially the early ones. You have a castle, you have a lord. He has a certain area of land. Well, people are going to want to be pretty close to the castle, right? If you're a farmer or if you are a blacksmith or something like that, and you live outside the castle, at the very least you want to be pretty close to the castle. That way, in case there is an attack, you can go in and you can be saved, right? You can have your life preserved. And so over time, what they would do is, here's your early settlement, and we have this curtain wall here. But over time, more people started to come in, and the Lord decided, well, I'm going to build another curtain wall. and then I'm going to build another curtain wall, and now I'm going to build another. And so we see these concentric rings of circles moving in. They're not all there for protection. It's just, I'm going to make my territory bigger. I'm going to increase commerce. Hey, more people are going to come and trade if I have more commerce within my walls that are safe and secure. He's very intent, if he's smart, he's very intent on making his whole community as safe as possible. How do you do that? Build a wall around them. It's not to keep them in. It's to make sure that they are safe and they feel secure. When you're secure, you can go about your life. You can make money, and the Lord gets taxes. So he is incentivized to make everyone safe. And so he's going to be basically fortifying an entire town. An entire town is going to eventually going to become part of his quote-unquote castle complex, even though he's still going to keep, the main curtain wall here. Sort of makes sense how that kind of develops over time? As we move forward, you can kind of see how this is going to work, right? This is Barcelona, Spain. We'll see a picture of this later, right? Barcelona has these really interesting city blocks. We'll see a view of that later. But this is your original castle complex, and then over time he's going to build more, and then he's going to build more. And there's all these guard towers. Sure, you have additional gates, but each one is going to be manned by a guard. And it's going to keep all the residents in this area very safe. That means more money for you. That means more taxes. That means more power. And it's a lot of land.
You're not going to feel like you're
Yep. And we do sort of the same kind of thing today, right? There's a new neighborhood that's built. There's a new development. All right, should we annex that into the city of Ahwatukee or Phoenix? Yeah, let's annex it. Now you have to pay taxes, but now you get city services. Now you get trash pickup, right? We're doing the exact same thing today. We're going to look at another picture of this. Most of the civic planning is very kind of mismatched, complex, right? There's not really going to be, all right, we're going to set this street out and we're going to do it all in this way, this way, this way. This is a very strange example because this is one of the few cities that was planned from the get-go. Perpendicular streets, not a lot of narrow walkways. Because that's how cities were built before. There was no broad plan. It was, oh, this guy's here, okay, let's build a street around him. Oh, there's a river here, let's do this. Oh, let's build a bridge here. So if you ever go to Europe and you're walking around these cities, it's going to be really strange for you because the streets are going to be very, very narrow. But they're called streets. We would call them alleys today here in the United States. They're streets. I'll show you some examples here in a little bit. Here's a view of
That's so cool.
Avila, Spain. This is what it looks like still today.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, there are suburbs. Yes, there's other city centers. That's a grocery store right there. But when you walk up to the town, you still walk into the city gates. And they're still very narrow. Cars can get in there, but it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, that's why like Italy's. Is that why Italy's so like just narrow?
Yeah, because do we want to tear down this entire town and make it work for cars? No, it's perfectly livable. You can live here and you can shop here and you can go to dinner here and you can go to church here, and it's all a 10-minute walk. You never have to leave.
That's why they're so thin. They just walk everywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of walking. There's a lot of, you don't get in your car to go somewhere, right? That's a very American style of living, right? Cars and parking lots everywhere. Why would we do that? We just walk. Most people don't even have a car. They don't need one. They rent one when they need to travel somewhere, or they take the bus, or they take the train. There's a very good public transit system. They don't need it. Here's another example, the Cité de Carcassonne, right? This is in France. So yeah, we have these suburbs out here, but this is the main city center still today. This is a much smaller town. This is not as big as some of the other ones that we've seen. Well, why don't they just tear this down and, well, it takes a lot of money to tear things down, and it's kind of a pain, and these were built to last. Remember, 40 feet tall, 10 feet thick, and there's a few of them? Leave it. Leave it. It's a lot easier.
Is it expensive to buy a house in there other than outside it?
I want to live there.
It depends on the town, not really, not anymore. Or not any more than most places here, right? So, and there's not really houses, right? Especially in these older cities, you don't buy a house, you buy an apartment. Because it's all kind of one big building. We'll see that here in a second. Actually, this is kind of a good example. This is Burgos, Spain, right? So when you're walking down these streets, you can see this is a street. Good luck driving a car down here. You're not going to, right?
With, like trees and
So this is all kind of one big building. And to your point, Evan, you wouldn't buy one of these unless you're very, very rich. You buy this apartment, and someone else buys this apartment, someone else buys this apartment. You can still see the old city wall here, still standing, right? Yeah, so there's a car. It goes in some streets, and you can get a car here, but people are going to be kind of ticked off, and the shop owner is going to be pulling the chairs in and giving you the finger, right? It's going to be kind of a big pain. So as we're developing cities, right, we don't have, like we have in the United States, we don't have here in the US, we have all these concepts of, all right, well, let's tear this down and let's make this freeway. They don't do that. It's, we leave what's here and we build around it. Oh, you want to build a freeway? We're going to build it outside the city. Well, it takes me an extra 10 minutes to get there. So what? Right? It's a very, very different way of doing things. The way that cities are built also are going to be very dependent on topography, right? On where it's built, right? This is Ravello on the Amalfi Coast, south of Italy.
Is it expensive to live there?
Down here, yes. This is like high end. But as you get up a little bit, no, right? Much less expensive to live up here. This is a street. Again, good luck getting a car through here. You can have she hates cats usually, but she liked that one. But this is, there's a little scooter there, right?
Yeah.
That's how you get around. You ride your little scooter. That's why Vespas are very popular in Italy. Florence,
Oh my
A lot of red.
Oh my gosh.
Red.
right? These are streets. That's a street.
That is so strange, man.
But it's built for walking. It's entirely built for walking.
But how, so, well, this one's way bigger, so it'll be a ton of
It's
walking.
a maze.
So yeah, but from here to here, it's 20 minutes.
And people also use Vespas a lot. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're-
So you can get trucks through some of these more main arterial streets, right?
That is squished.
So this is your market. This is the main area for the market here, right? So the market is here, the church is here, and then here's your towns.
Well, these
Right.
gotta be expensive because it's beautiful, isn't it?
It's not as bad as you'd think. Yeah, it's really not. Here's the train station, right? This is the train station going out of Florence. So you want to travel somewhere, you want to go outside of the town, you walk to the train station. So when I was here, I was having lunch with a girl right around here, and she needed to get up to a convent in northern Italy. And so I walked her to the train station and made sure she got her train on time. From here to here, 15 minutes. We were able to walk it. And then I went back and still joined my friends for lunch. Pretty easy. This is Rome,
So cool.
Trastevere.
Did you take this picture?
Not this one, no. This is a street. It just dead ends at a building. Okay? Here's a wider street in Trastevere, but you can still see it's still pretty narrow. Again, made for foot traffic. Oops, I duplicated these. Ravello, this is the same town, right, where it's built on the side of a mountain. Welcome to your street. Well, how do I get deliveries? Well, you carry it,
You don't live in America.
So
Right.
do they have like Amazon?
Whoa.
I'm sorry?
Do they have Amazon here?
Yeah.
Yours good.
Yep.
Actually?
Yep. Assisi.
It's a model right there.
Assisi, she's a very nice lady. You calm down.
I don't know if she wants.
Assisi, built on a hill town, right? So yeah, you can drive cars around, but it's one way. You see another car coming, you better back up,
Yeah, that's tough.
right? And then this is one of my favorite streets in Assisi. It's stairs.
That's crazy.
That's your street. Okay, so
Was it practically like know everybody?
yeah, I mean, these are small towns. So yeah, you do know a lot of people, right? Not in a city like Florence, right? That's still pretty big. But in smaller towns like Assisi, like Ravello, places like that, yeah, you know everyone, right? It's very much a small town. And that's kind of the concept, right? This whole idea of, you look at Phoenix and it goes, if you go on top of South Mountain or Camelback and you look, it's sprawl, right? They don't have that, right? Because, well, geography is not going to allow it, but also you just don't live like that. If there's no room in this town, you go live in another one, right? You don't start building out. Now there are some of that is starting to happen in Europe, but that's why this concept of, like a family like ours that has 3 cars. When I was over in Italy, they'd be like, it's funny. It's one thing they was like, how many cars do you guys have? I said 3. We have 3 cars. My uncle has a car. It's like that's like the one person in my extended family has a car. We all borrow it when we need it because we never use it, right? We have Vespas. We have little scooters. That's about it.
Do most people not have a driver's license?
Mm-mm. No,
Do you need a license to drive a Vespa?
I don't think so.
Where are all the convents and like all of this separate?
That's usually separate. That's usually separate. And there would be some fortifications. We're going to have a class just on the monasteries and the convents.
Why do you need a license to drive a Vespa? It's still like a motorcycle, isn't it?
If it's a small enough engine, you don't have to. So this is another view of that town that we looked at before, Elburg, Netherlands. This is one of the few examples of a medieval town that was planned from the very get-go with straight streets, right, with city blocks. And that's going to be very unique. You're not going to see this happen. And then we have Barcelona. Remember, Barcelona was the one we looked at with all the walls, right? We had that city wall, and then we had the wall, and then another wall, and I was pointing out the towers up here and here. But as Barcelona grew, then they said, okay, now we need to do some civic planning.
Yeah, how do you not get like lost in these areas?
That's so good.
This is Barcelona. It's
Look at the thing in the middle.
really fascinating, right? Almost.
Is it easy to get lost?
What church is this? Seniors?
Oh,
Sancta Familia something?
no, it's a weird one.
Close.
It's all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
weird
yeah, yeah.
stuff.
It's
Looks like it's
Not Santa. It's Spanish, so it's
Sagrada Familia.
Sagrada Familia. Yeah. Yep. Sagrada Familia.
Wait,
So how do you not get
all the
lost?
roads, like, lead up to that church.
Yeah. A lot of the roads lead up to it. How do you not get lost? I'm on 7th Street and I don't know, Sagrada Familia Avenue. I don't know.
That's a long street sign.
Yeah.
Why do they make those?
Everything's like so
What is that?
So these are all houses. So you have apartments up here. You have shops down here, and then there's an interior courtyard, and that's basically kind of like the city block park.
That's your own
So
town.
they're each like a
It's not a town. It's
very
a little.
complex.
Yeah, it's a little complex.
How many stories are those?
Oh, I don't know. What, 8, 10? Something like that. Now, this is the very dense center part of Barcelona. Not all of Barcelona is like this, right?
That's what I'm saying. Like, do families buy one? And
Like,
No,
there's
it's
a
too
whole
big
thing.
for.
Yeah, no, you'd buy one apartment. So one
Story.
block, yeah. Not one story or a few stories in one area, yeah.
what's the thing in the middle?
So,
Like in the
Oh.
like in the
That's the
center.
cathedral.
yeah,
Cathedral.
yep. You'll learn about that next year. Okay. So that's kind of civic planning. It all started with the castle, right? It all started with the Lord. He has land, he has an area, I need to defend it. Oh, people want to come and live nearby me for defense. Great, that's going to enrich me. I'm going to continue to build around it. And that's how Europe was built. America, again, very different. We don't have all those sieges. We don't have the lords and all that kind of stuff. We have much more of a rule of law, a centralized government that allows, we don't have to have all those kind of walls and castles. So what do we have? Parking lots.
So
Parking
that's what
lots.
Barcelona looks like.
Yeah, that's Barcelona.
Have you
Okay.
been there?
I have not. I'd like to.
Yikes.
Okay. See you tomorrow.
What's like the next place in the world that you want to go visit?
I would like to go back to Spain again, see some other spots. Greece would be pretty cool.
Bruges would be cool.
That's up there.